Okay, so I'm waiting for Sarah to join. I don't know whether she's able to find this out. Ah, there she is. Okay, so I don't know how to... Hello, how do I invite you to join? View. I think it's going to work now. Hello!
Hi!
Oh, finally! Okay, it's working.
Hold on, let me adjust this camera 1 second. It's a little high. Okay. Is that good?
Yeah, it's very nice to see you.
Hi! Good to see you. It's been
So
a second.
this is two painters trying to navigate technology and
The world
failing
of
miserably.
tech.
And given
Yeah.
that we're in a show which is supposedly about kind of
I,
proficiency with social media, I think we're off to a really good
this is
start.
true. But yeah, don't forget we do like one of the most old-fashioned activities every single day.
This
So,
is true. Perhaps, hopefully, we can be better at the old-fashioned one than the new
yes.
technology one.
This is true. I'll stick
Uh,
with my like mixing pigments with an old-timey knife and like these old mediums and binders and stuff all day. I'll
yeah.
stay analog, I think.
I think that is my option too. So you've got a massive head start on me in that you've been to see the show, and I haven't seen it yet.
This is
Uh,
true, yes, but will you be able to see it?
I am hoping to see it,
Good.
yeah, before the end. Although we've just in the UK, we've just gone into a lockdown for a month.
I know.
So, but the
I
plan
know.
is that I might go over at the beginning of the new year if that's
Great.
possible. So
Yeah,
were
yeah.
you happy with seeing your work in the spaces? I mean, it looks amazing in the
Yeah.
photographs.
Well, it was funny that so the two paintings that they included, I made back to back, and they were sort of two different riffs on a similar idea, and I'd never seen them side by side before.
Mm,
They kind of went different places from the moment I made them, and getting to see them together was very, I don't know, it was like sort of, it was both sentimental for me because it was there from 2019, and also I don't know, just really interesting to get to see these ideas
mm,
and decisions that I made back to back that I never really got to see. So
mm.
yeah, that was really nice. And then in the context of the show, it was just like absolutely fantastic.
Mm.
So yeah,
I
how
think
about
it's,
you?
yeah, so the works that I've got in the show, some of them date back really quite a long time,
Oh yeah.
probably even 8 years, 9 years.
Oh
So,
wow.
and it's quite a span of things that went up to things that I made last year. So, um, it's like the most compact retrospective ever. But I enjoyed the way, like you, I mean, the way things can kind of uh, there's this sort of temporal disjunction, where
Yeah.
I was thinking about a completely different set of ideas, both in terms of subject matter and techniques and all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
then I think one of the things that maybe I was thinking about talking to you about anyway, which is this idea of something deeper, which kind of underpins all, whether it's the visual decisions that you make or the kind of choices about subject matter and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was
Mm-hmm.
quite reassuring to see somehow, even though it was quite oblique, a set of themes and kind of preoccupations that were sort of
Yeah.
quite consistent even over
Yeah.
the
Completely.
discontinuities. Yeah.
I know. I think individually, a lot of times we always feel like, um, I look back at work that I was making in 2017 and I feel like that was a different person and I don't
Mm, mm,
recognize that work. But
mm,
then when I see it in the context of what I'm making now and I see these like hands that we're developing as sort of figures in
yeah,
themselves,
yeah,
I'm like, oh, it was all there. Exactly
yeah,
like you were saying. It's nice to see that thread of I don't know, who you are kind of coming
Mm,
out as.
mm.
It's like looking at baby photos or videos or something, and you
Yeah,
see
right.
things
Kind
about
of
yourself. Yeah.
extrapolating. It's almost
Yes.
like, yeah, there is this sort of process of extrapolating yourself from this
Yeah.
kind of messy sea of possibilities, and it's
Exactly.
like,
Yeah.
so do you feel that you're like if you were to sort of give a percentage, what percentage do you reckon you're guided by instinct, and what percentage do you reckon you're guided by sort of intellectual, or kind of conscious thought, conscious thinking in your choices?
I already cannot wait to ask you the same question.
Yeah, okay.
But okay,
I'm
you
dreading
asked
having
it
to
first.
answer it. I'm sorry.
I think I know what I'm interested in
Mm,
such a like in this very umbrella sense.
mm,
So the imagery that I'm making all kind of fits in this umbrella. Um, when I finished grad school in 2016, and we were writing about our work constantly. We were verbally defending our work constantly. And I think while that was really good for me,
mm,
I am I think I make better work when I can follow my intuition
mm,
a little bit
mm,
more. And of course it all fits under the umbrella because it's us.
mm.
It's what we're interested in. Um, and also sometimes it takes making the paintings and then waiting a few months or a year or whatever, looking back and thinking like, oh, that is what I was interested
Yeah,
in.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And yeah, so I guess to answer your question, it's a little bit of both. But when I'm in the studio, like actually painting, intellectualizing it so much is distracting.
Mm,
I like to
mm,
go on a gut feeling.
mm.
But how about you?
Well, it's for me, it's a really kind of toing and froing, and like sometimes one facet's helping the process, and sometimes it's really, really hindering the process.
Yeah.
So, to give you an example, with the painting I'm working on at the moment,
Mhm.
the the kind of underpainting I did, I had this idea, and initially that kind of came from quite a kind of like I had a sort of an idea, like a premise, so I suppose a sort of conscious thought of something I wanted,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then in my like logged, and I've got this sort of library of images in my
Mhm.
subconscious, obviously not
Yes.
not as accessible as though I could just go through, but they sort of sit there in the swamp of my subconscious,
Yes.
and every now and then kind of one pops up, and I'm like,
Yeah, like
oh,
it rises to the
I've
surface.
got to do something with this,
Yeah.
and then it's like, and then weirdly sometimes, and I think it is like the swamp kind of sticking its hand out and offering something up. It's like, here's
Hmm.
another thing. Maybe think about this in relation to this,
Yes. Yes.
And so I've been
Love this
initially,
metaphor.
thank you.
Like an offering from the
Yeah,
mud
well,
and
that's so,
gore.
and I think all our funny experiences, every museum, I mean, because Sarah, we've both been to museums together, and it's really,
Yes.
I always think it's fantastic seeing like someone you admire, the way they look at art, and watching them looking at art, and then seeing the way that you look at art and talking about it. It's a really
Yeah, me too.
fascinating. But all those experiences, it's like they do lay down kind of layers of sediment in one's own swamp, I think, Anyway,
Yeah.
so instincts guided me to this thing, which I think I've used my intellect to kind of fashion into a concept, or a kind of a sort of broad brush image. And then
Yeah.
I have this really kind of confident, cocky stage in the underpainting where I'm just like, yeah, I've got my virtuosity. I can just hack this out. And
I want to see these underpaintings.
oh, I sometimes post images on my Instagram. Well, it's normally on my stories rather than on my
Okay.
thing. But
Right, because you want
um,
it to disappear
yeah,
after a little
exactly.
bit.
I do want them to disappear, but I sort of want them to be seen as well.
Yeah.
But anyway, sometimes I really love my underpainting, and I get this really kind of miserable feeling of like, why can't I just leave it like that? Because it's got this freshness, but there just isn't enough in there, really,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, long term, or at least
Mm-hmm.
not for me anyway. Um, but so what's happened recently is I did this quite good. Well, I was quite happy with the underpainting, and then I just got way too cowardly and polite. So it was almost like colouring in and trying to finish it off and not lose the spontaneity, but somehow
Yeah.
add and the whole thing just became kind of increasingly fragmented, and
Mm-hmm.
unsatisfactory and illustrative, and all the energy got sucked out of it. And and the thing that's interesting is I was asking myself every day, I was going to go, why is this happening? Why? And I was trying to think consciously and come up with strategies. And then I just realized, right, I'm just going to start. I got my palette knife out and I put some fairly random color, but stuff that I thought instinctively might work. And I just blocked over areas and I started scraping back with a palette knife and wiping things away. And then that sort of like almost random factor suggested something. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll make this a bit pink. And then my instinct started taking over. And before I knew it, I'm like, yes, I can follow this train of thought.
Yeah.
And I think so. I think that was this moment where kind of instinct kind of overrides the. But then, and I think so. There is like I think probably like most painters, there's a kind of toing and froing between instinct and then kind of leaning back into your skill set and kind of procedures that you know how to do and the kind of etc. So
well, I think it's once you set up the framework for what you're interested in, then you can sort of follow that line. Like you just don't have to think about it quite as much because the framework is there. And if I'm all about putting one foot in front of the other, because making either lateral steps where I feel like my imagery is not moving forward is uncomfortable for me, but because I just feel like I'm wasting time. But also trying to jump like 4 steps ahead of the last painting is, while that is probably a better way to work and very functional, it's very terrifying for me
totally
to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
And I think sometimes we do throw the baby out with the bathwater because it's like it's kind of impossible. Well, I always find it a bit impossible to think that many steps in advance. It's like so each progressive step is increasingly vague, and I think that anyway. So.
But then like you keep going, the one foot in front of the other, like you keep that nice pace going, and then you can look back, at least for me, I can look back and see like, oh, I think this particular thing is now added to my framework because this I see like suddenly I'm very interested in this sort of palette or this mood or this whatever, and it generally makes sense because if you're making paintings about things you're interested in, it all always makes sense. Like it's always pertinent to what you're doing. And then that gets like swept in with, whatever writing I do about my work or reading or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, it's a, in terms of framework, I guess it's like, or what you're asking about intuition versus the like into research or intellectual component, it's all like this dance. I think.
So can I ask you a question about subject matter?
You're great about questions. I love this. Please go on.
So I think about the kind of vocabulary of sort of subjects, and I think it is like a kind of lexicon, and it's like each extension that you add, each new ingredient seems, what I love about it is that it seems both completely right, but sometimes kind of illogical. So for instance, like, you've got these breasts that, sort of lactating. And we talked a little bit about what the origin of, your own personal experience that led to the origin of that. And I'll leave it up to you whether you talk about that.
Sure.
But I think some of the extensions of things like strings of pearls or lipstick or what's some of the other things, the kind of cloud-like forms and the hands, obviously, and all that kind of stuff. When I look at them, one of the things I'm seeing is that it's almost like watching an abstract painter try to reconfigure mark making into something that kind of sits within a symbolic register. And you're looking, so for instance, when you make the marks with the lipstick, there's the actual mark of the paint and the mark of which is both the thing in itself, but it's also symbolically representing this trace of lipstick, which is both sitting on the surface of the canvas, but is also kind of mapping over the forms that are within the space. So there's all these kind of meta levels of mark making. But what I think is particularly kind of powerful about the way you do it is I get the feeling it's very kind of tightly woven into this internal sort of vocabulary that has really strong meanings for you, like psychological or kind of powerful, personal. So it feels very personal, but it also
Yeah.
feels very structured from a symbolic point of view, and I find that really fascinating. So my question is, having
Oh gosh, that
done the
is, I mean,
preamble,
I hope someone's recording this so that I can replay it when I'm feeling like really ho-hum in the studio and I can be like, Ben said it works.
well, I think it does self-evidently work. But my question was, do you, like, for instance, we've come with when a new element kind of comes into, like with the idea of the lipstick, is it just something that you, because it's like it's a really perfect solution to a problem. So if I were to sit down and think, if I were to think about a mark that could exist on the skin, what could kind of trace that I could use, oh right, lipstick, that kind of works. So is there that sort of process, or again, I suppose we're coming back to that instinct. Do you, is it quite an organic process that adding new ingredients to your overall kind of vocabulary? Uh,
So you have hit on something that is uh, like I really think a lot about because I'm
mm,
hesitant to add stuff to
mm,
my to these paintings because the bodies are so important and I
mm,
think it's easy to sort of cram them full of like things that are sort of nonsense
mm,
and
mm,
like
mm.
stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
and I am very hesitant to do that if it's not an object that I have like a very personal relationship
Mm,
with or that I even want to probably carry through to further paintings. Um, because if I have those two ingredients that I have a personal relationship with it, I want to carry it through to other paintings, and then also it has to have like a very heavy, um, I guess, a heavy or maybe wide relationship with my audience.
hmm
Um,
Well, so
then
something that could be picked up on, you mean? Like, not,
yes,
yeah.
exactly. Like something that would make sense to
Mm,
specifically another woman.
mm,
Um,
mm,
because they're women's bodies
mm.
and I can't imagine what the perspective is from a man. So so I stick with what I can imagine women feeling.
Mm,
But um, it just takes me a lot of time and I'm to figure out what that thing is. Like
mm,
when I saw, and I don't remember if I saw the oil stick. So the lipstick marks are made in oil, red oil
mm,
stick.
mm,
I don't remember if I saw the oil stick first and thought about lipstick
mm,
or if I thought about lipstick and then found an oil
mm,
stick.
mm,
But like that sort of relationship was this perfect thing that
mm,
also fit.
mm,
And so like that was done. And
mm,
then the like tampon strings, like
mm,
that made total sense to me
mm,
because it's this binding or like
mm,
restriction, but then
mm,
also has some sensuality. And then also like there are these ridiculous things that we live with. I mean, they
mm,
always remind me of like, you know, those dolls that have the string. If you pull it, they say like
mm.
"mama."
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's so absurd, and yet it's so quotidian and everyday. But then also it's like hidden and
Mm.
shameful. And so like I think there are these little things in our lives that are so powerful like that.
And they structure our experience in such invisible but such kind of,
Yes.
and I think, and I was thinking
Yes.
as you were talking about this, the way often, like thinking about gender and
Hmm.
uh I mean, obviously I don't have any direct insight into the experience of being a woman, but I can imagine, looking at your work and seeing the way the kind of iconography has this really quite, sometimes quite frightening power, I think. Like it's kind of overrunning the bodies and
Hmm.
overrunning, like it's both constructing identity, but also maybe kind of undoing it, or like,
Yeah.
and I find that really, really fascinating. And I really get a very strong sense of these kind of hidden, well, this is my take, seeing it from the outside, obviously, but my sense is that there is this, sense of exploring the things that kind of underpin these invisible things that
Yeah.
somehow underpin
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Well,
female
and there are
experience.
sort of these like whimsical but also like cruel things that I
Mm.
think that we deal with as women. And yeah, and that's why I've started painting these safety pins too,
Oh
because
wow, okay.
like um I, like as growing up, I always had a safety pin with me, like, and still to this day, because um and my mom, I think I picked it up from my mom because she sews a whole lot and she was always like pinning something.
Mm.
And, you know, like if part of your outfit comes, like specifically if you're wearing something that crosses over
Mm,
like
right.
that, like as a woman, like you got to pin that shut.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and, but then they also are these like, they're so distinctly feminine to me.
Mm.
I mean, there's like diaper pins
Mm.
like that, and but then they're also like little tiny torture devices. You know, you can stick yourself
Totally.
with them, and
I love the phrase safety pin. It's like such a weird
right,
oxymoron
right.
in itself.
And like as a male, it's same thing with sort of bobby pins. Like
Right.
as a female, these things are sort of like sprinkled around my existence,
Mm.
literally around my apartment.
Mm.
You know, like I look under my bed and I'm like, why are there 16 bobby pins under my bed? And
Mm.
you know, there's like these things
I
that
love that.
hold
The sort of
us.
paraphernalia. Yeah. They're in
They're
your
like,
cloud, hidden under your
right,
bed. Yeah.
right, exactly. There are these things that like hold women's lives together.
Mm.
Um,
I was really struck by a phrase you said earlier when you said you've got to pin that shut and you covered your chest. And it's this idea of the safety pin holding something together. And it's almost like, I'm going to be too poncy here, but almost like trying to hold together something that's to stop obscenity or something. And
That's exactly what it is.
I
Yeah.
almost
So
wonder with
that
your,
you don't
yeah.
like reveal too much of yourself in a public place and then become an obscene person who should
Mm.
not be there or should be covered or should be, you know, looked upon with shame. So it's like these sort of tropes about womanhood are the stuff that I want to use. So it's not just like bullshit stuff
So do
that I
you think they perform a similar function in your paintings of holding the paintings together to stop them being obscene? Because there is a sense they are
that
these
was
kind of
very meta of
amorphous,
you.
well, I know, sorry, thank you. But they're very amorphous, these kind of cloud, and they have this sort of
Yeah.
whizzy elastic energy as though they're going to kind of
Yeah.
pin apart at any moment.
Yeah.
Or they're certainly in flux and movement. And I do think that the introduction of particularly the more explicitly real symbolic things like lipstick or strings of pearls or the tampons or anything, they do kind of pin the paintings closed a little bit more in a
Yeah,
funny way, which
yeah. Or at least
um,
pin them to reality a
mm,
little bit. Like stick them in something that is not just like a fantasy body, but is,
mm,
which is, I think, also like oftentimes how women feel, but like a fantasy body that also has to deal with this like sort of banal everyday
mm,
stuff, which
mm,
is, I mean, truly what it feels like. Um, you know, and just to give an example of this, I've been sort of struggling lately with people interpreting my work as like highly erotic and
mm,
about
mm,
sex. And I do not feel this way at
mm,
all.
mm,
It's like you cannot portray a woman's nude body without people being like, oh, it's about sex.
mm,
But I just don't see, I know that they're sensual and that is absolutely intentional. And there's probably an aspect of sexuality, but it, it's like these are just bodies.
mm,
They're
mm,
just like how it feels to be in a woman's body.
mm,
And
mm.
ironically, the fact that you I can't seem to paint a nude woman's body without it being about sex is like exactly the problem.
Yeah,
Exactly the issue here.
it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because I think this idea of trying to articulate the experience of being embodied. So this is something that I've thought I really try and
Yes.
approach this in my work,
With the
and I think,
fracturing, I would love to hear
yeah,
more about
well,
the
so
fracturing of bodies.
so that's with some, but I think there's a number of different approaches of thinking about embodiedness. So
Mhm.
it's almost like I want to take a vessel that I find in the world, like a found object, like
Mhm.
literally, like, take the idea of Duchampian idea of found object. So what could my found object be? And that might be like a Picasso drawing as a starting point,
Mhm.
or a image of a dog, or a bull, or a
Mhm.
nude woman, or a nun, or whatever. And then
Yeah.
this idea of having it in my studio and kind of losing myself, like this kind of
Uh,
performing this operation of weird instinct and intellect and thinking and unthinking and making
yeah.
and unmaking,
I'm thinking, yes.
to this point where hopefully it arrives where it's kind of animated by a sort of sense of uh, self, or some sort of sense of me that's both not that's both there in the object but also kind of not really the object. And I think
Mm.
when I painted women's bodies, and I think I sometimes feel quite uncomfortable, especially when I think I've not quite got it right about this, because it's almost as though that, well, I mean, it's easy to see it as kind of sexualized images, but actually the funny thing is, for me, like you, I don't see them as sexual images. I see it as
Mhm.
the peculiarity of inhabiting this weird body. So when I'm
Yeah.
painting a woman's body, I feel kind of similar as if I'm painting something from a Japanese print or a dog or something. It's like, what is this strange thing to be in
Yes. As an
something?
image.
Yeah, as an image, exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right. And for your sensibility to kind of be projecting both onto the surface of the painting and kind of
Mhm.
beyond the surface of the painting, as though you're kind of creating
Yeah.
something beneath the symbolism that is sort of real and not. Anyway, yeah.
Well, it's I hearing you talk about that makes perfect sense to me because maybe it has to do with the fact that we see so much painting, so
Mm,
much art.
mm,
And so for us, for me at least, I can speak for me, to see a nude figure is like, I don't I don't care. Like I've been
mm,
drawing in figure drawing from nude bodies since I was a teenager.
mm,
This it's not a big deal. But what is interesting to me is that like machination of images.
mm.
What you were talking about, seeing something and then like chewing it up in your
Yeah,
mind and
exactly. That's
spitting it
exactly
out
it.
and like
Yeah.
seeing what happened. What does
Mm,
that look like?
mm,
Taking a Japanese print and filtering it through who Ben is, this
mm,
time that you're living in, this like even just your personal experience that
mm,
day and seeing what comes
mm,
out. That and coupled with your like crazy mind blowing technique, like that is what's interesting to me
mm,
about your work.
mm,
And but yeah, I feel like I'm looking at like a little bit behind the curtain of you
mm,
in those paintings, even though they very like clearly have a starting point that maybe I
mm,
could recognize, like a Picasso drawing
mm,
or that kind of thing.
mm,
Is that
mm.
something that you think about in the studio?
Oh,
That
completely. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
uh-huh.
But I also think, when I think about, so as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the studios and your studio. And so these are these funny, yeah. I couldn't do it in my studio because I haven't got enough internet reception. So
uh,
sadly, otherwise I would show. There are some paintings behind me, but they're unfortunately out of view. Um, but the studio that, so we are, subjected to, we've been to museums and all that kind of stuff. But of course we're online and we're looking at Instagram and we're finding new. There's all this kind of network out that kind of leads out, and then there's this kind of
mhm.
space where we go and we're just there
Yeah,
in this room filled,
yeah,
like,
and
that's this
yes,
kind of quiet space where these
yeah,
weird, more primal,
yeah,
funny things kind of coalesce in a certain sort
yeah.
of way. And I think I've been thinking about this today, actually, because I've been really struggling with this painting, and it's just started to go well today. And it almost feels like, when it's not, thank you, when it's not, there is this sort of sense of,
When you
like,
crack that nut, there
but it's the
is.
sense of shedding. It's like the shedding off, sloughing off all the stuff in the external world, which has kind of got you where you are. But then there's
Yeah.
this. But in order to kind of do the thing with it, to do the Sarah thing with it, or to do the Ben thing with it, it's almost like, for a
Yeah.
second you have to go to your quiet place,
Yes.
with nothing else, and just immerse yourself in being yourself with the kind of thoughts that you've brought
Yes.
in there. And
Yes.
I think that's really, and so when I look at your work, one of the things that really instantly, even seeing it just on Instagram to start with, was I looked and I thought, I can imagine that person's experience in their studio and how authentic it seems that
Really?
you're really, yeah, I felt so, it felt very, and I think that for me, that's what I really go to with paintings, where you get that sense of someone engaging with contemporary
Yeah.
experience, but also that kind of really much more kind of personal, perhaps a bit more complicated, a bit deeper kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
experience just on their own, the kind of wrestling on your own.
Right. Yeah. Right. This is not my studio, and I get this feeling about yours, is not a place of production,
Mm,
like machine production
mm,
for me. And it's very much, I don't know. I've always described in my own mind that if a diary was a place, it would be a studio. This is
right,
just
okay.
where, and um, yeah, it's you've touched on something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, because I opened this show in Zurich
Mm,
um, in September.
mm,
It just came down like 2 days ago, and I um, so strongly had this feeling, which I felt before, but maybe the strongest then, um, because I'd been like living with all of these paintings for months, and they just like this is just an extremely personal thing that you do, and they just literally surround you in your
mm,
eyesight.
mm, mm,
And especially with quarantine here in New York, um, I mean, there was no place for these things to go, and there
mm,
was no place for me to go. I just like a ping pong ball between my studio and home.
mm,
That's it. It was a very like quiet, mental, insular
mm,
place.
mm,
And then suddenly these paintings in a day got picked up, shipped out to another country, and I actually
mm,
was able to go, which is
mm,
crazy. And I'm glad I went to Europe then and left the city for a month. Um, but then you see them on the wall in a different place, and you're like, why are the pages of my diary hanging on a
absolutely.
wall? Like, it's very, very strange. And then suddenly you become like very public,
Mm,
and um, it's it's hard, it's thrilling,
mm,
um, it is confusing for me.
mm, mm,
But yeah, and I feel the same thing about your work, that it's so extremely personal,
mm,
that like you can see you wrestling with both the image and the making of the image,
mm,
and that is a very personal activity.
mm, mm.
And so then to make it extremely public is,
That
what do you
cocktail,
think?
that cocktail of emotions you describe, of like thrilling, terrifying, excited, and
Yeah,
but deeply surprised often, because I think the things that you know that I've had a whole set of expectations about how something works, both visually and in terms of its content, when
hmm,
I'm in the studio with it. And it's so surprising sometimes when things go out onto another wall, that all these kind of quite things that have been quite carefully calibrated in the light of the studio
yeah.
suddenly seem quite different. Sometimes it's great because you go, oh, you're way better than I thought you were going to be. And then others are, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And then
right.
others you're a bit like, oh man, what
I
was
know,
I thinking?
I know,
Um, but I think because this is something I think is really it's been really important to me. So to say something a little bit about my history for the last few years,
hmm,
prior to maybe 2.5 years ago, I hadn't really, the previous show I'd had been about 12 years or 10 years, I think, before that. So I hadn't really done a lot of showing of my
hmm,
work. And I think there's something amazing about the kind of relationship between that process. Like you do the stuff, you have all these internal experiences, and then it goes out in the world. Not only are
yes,
other people responding to it, but you respond to your work, and then
yeah,
you take that kind of discontinuity, that shock of seeing the work in the
yeah,
gallery. I then
yeah,
take it back into the studio. It constantly is kind of really reconfiguring my studio practice quite a lot.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Well, and I think, when, don't get me wrong, it's a little bit of champagne problems having your work leave the studio so fast and not come
yeah,
back.
yeah,
However, I think emotionally and intellectually, it's a little bit difficult because, um, you know, the term body of work is, to me, very like almost literal.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That like having this group of images that I've cared about, that I've grown
Mm,
through,
mm,
that have been like very personally meaningful to me.
mm,
There is something like extremely comforting
mm,
about keeping it around you. I mean,
mm.
it's like a diary. It's sort of like, imagine if you had to sell your diary.
Well, you know, so around the time of the opening of my show in London last year in June, so I was going to I've been in therapy for a few years, and I was talking to my therapist, and the
Bravo.
thing was, thank you, but it was been very, it was a strange combination of incredibly exciting. The show had been, reasonably successful and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff, but I couldn't stop sort of kind of just kind of weeping about the show, about like, and I realized, and my therapist was saying to me, said, uh, your paintings, he said, what I see is that your paintings are like a part of your body.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
what's happened is some people have come along and
Mhm.
they're pecking parts of your body off.
Yeah.
They're taking your body away.
Hacking, exactly.
Yeah, that was her word. And I sort
Yeah.
of thought, and I was, it's a very kind of voluptuous, visceral kind of description that she
It
used, but it
is.
really felt apt at the time. I
Yeah.
felt like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is why I'm upset. I feel like I'm being pecked, and it's not an
Yeah.
active part of cruelty, but it's that we do make these things that are our body, are kind of our day-to-day thinking,
Mhm.
and then they go out into the world and people take them away. Or, it's not
Yeah.
even the buying and them going away, but it's even just people consuming them. It's like when people consume
Mhm.
them, something of
Yeah.
yourself goes
Yeah.
into the world. And it's
Right.
amazing and a privilege and all that kind of stuff, but it's
Yes.
kind of painful at the same time.
First and foremost, to be able to put it out in the world and have people talk about it and care and enjoy it is I mean, I make work both for myself, but to be clear, and I think probably I'm making it with an audience in mind. There is
Definitely. Yeah,
something
for sure.
I
Yeah.
want to say
Mm,
and get out there.
mm.
But when I'm in the studio by myself, I'm the only audience.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
when I'm making like coming up with the ideas and stuff,
Mm,
audience of one.
mm,
And so I guess it goes back to the confusion of all of the emotions of
mm,
showing work.
mm,
And then to have the joy of seeing those two paintings
mm,
in Friends
mm,
and Friends of Friends
mm.
together. It's like seeing two lost siblings
Mm,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
reunited.
Mm,
And
mm,
so that I think that was my yes, this is my first experience ever seeing work that was never shown together. So two different, same body of work, but went to different places, come back
mm,
in
mm,
and have that
mm,
conversation. And that was
mm.
really that like filled in some of my pecking holes, I
Yeah.
think.
I have to go and see the show. I can't wait to go and see it now, to see all my things. I
Yeah.
I I was told that we shouldn't talk for more than half an hour.
Has it already been half an hour?
I think it's been
Well,
nearly 50
you
minutes,
know,
so
based on
apologies.
our car ride through Italy for 4 hours, I think you and I could just talk for the rest
I
of our
think we
lives.
probably could. I think we probably could. Um, but we probably should leave
I
people
know,
before we
I
fall
know.
into it. Uh, well, it's been so lovely to speak to you.
Same. And yeah, it's also been a pleasure to show alongside your work.
Yes.
I have been a fan of yours for way longer than I've known you personally. So it's always quite
Oh,
an honor
same
to
thing.
be in your company.
We should probably just say, because it's funny, that the first time we met in
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 the
uh,
in the
Copenhagen in the
the
airport,
airport. Yeah.
yeah, and it was like, oh, you're Sarah, and you're like, you're Ben,
You're
and then
you.
it was like, but then it was like, oh, you're really annoying because you're too good. We were both like, ah, which is
Yeah.
which is a weird, I think it's a very typically painter thing. It's this kind of like thing of like, if someone does really like feel really good to you, it's both so exciting but sort of threatening and great and awful at the same
Yeah.
time. So
Yes,
uh,
it's true. It's true.
yeah.
Yes, you are the color master that I will always look up to and try to be, and always fail.
Well, I'm not sure
But
about that, but thank you. And yeah, compliments returned. I look at your work all the time and feel like, I need to up my game. So anyway, let's
all
leave it
right,
on a super positive note. But
lovely. All right. Well, thank you to everybody, and thank you to Ben
yeah,
for
thank you
setting
to
this
everyone
up.
watching. That's great.
And
Thank you. And thank
yeah,
you to the museum,
thank you
more
to the
importantly,
museum.
for
Yes,
doing
Annika
so, and to Ollie and Annika and
Ollie.
I was a little bit impatient with Annika with my technological idiocy. So I'm sorry, Annika, for being a bit sharp with you about
And
that.
Vanessa and
And Vanessa,
Alfred,
yeah, amazing.
Andrea, and yeah,
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 everyone, thank you.
yeah. All
So,
right.
all right,
Thanks, guys.
see you soon. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Bye,
Bye. Bye,
bye,
Ben.
bye. Sorry.